Hello, it's great to be with you here this evening, even if it is digitally. I'm Sean and I've been invited by the Christian Union here to speak at part of their events week, Redefine. Tonight we're going to be looking at Christianity and science. But before we dive in, I want to start by telling you a story. It goes something like this. Once upon a time, people believed in fairies and demons and spirits and God. And it helps them give some kind of comfort when faced with things they did not understand. But over time, people became rational and scientific. And they started to be able to explain more and more. It meant that they no longer needed fairies and spirits and demons and God to explain things. They grew up and left these comfort stories behind. They were able to deal with the hard facts of reality. I wonder if this story sounds familiar to you. Some people believe that it's the story that we live in. And I would have to say it sounds rather compelling. And a story that allows us to shed this childish belief in God and grow up into rational and scientifically thinking grown-ups, where we're the heroes of the story. It's a story that says we used to use God as a filler for things that we don't understand. But we don't need that anymore. Science is able to explain more and more. And we have to ask, where are the limits? The chemist Peter Atkins seems to think that there aren't any limits. He wrote this: "There is no reason to suppose that science cannot deal with every aspect of existence." Atkins makes the claim that the story I told is not over, but it's still going on, and always will. That science is sufficient to explain every aspect of our world, our universe, and even us. And that seems to leave no room for God. That if we used God like a cosmic wall filler, who filled in the gaps and the cracks of our knowledge, then as science becomes more and more powerful and more accurate, the gaps don't need to be filled, and that science is able to push God out of the picture. Atkins seems to think that religion had a role to play, but doesn't anymore. The words immediately preceding "there is no reason to suppose that science cannot deal with every aspect of our existence" are these words: "Science, the system of belief founded securely on publicly shared, reproducible knowledge, emerged from religion. As science discarded its chrysalis to become its present butterfly, it took over the heath." Very kindly, Atkins does give credit where credit's due. He seems to acknowledge that religion had a role to play, and it helped us give us science in its current setup, that it came from religion. But that for Atkins is where it has to stop. Religion had a role to play in the past, but that it needs to step aside. It needs to be left in the past as we spread our wings and learn to fly, with our new scientific wings giving us more freedom to explore higher and wider. This view seems to think that belief in God is irrational or unscientific, that it's a relic from a past time, and that people who believe in God need to get with the program. That one day science will explain everything and leave God redundant. And so it seems we have a choice to make, and we must choose to believe in God or science. A clash of the titans, science versus religion. And if we believe what we've heard so far, it seems like God is going to be on the losing side. And on a personal note, that's something that troubles me. And you see, I quite like science. I have a bit of a soft spot for it. To the point where I decided to spend 4 years at university studying maths and physics. But I don't know if you could guess, I'm also quite keen on God. The Christian Union have invited me to speak at this event, and I'm a committed Christian. So this claim means that either I'm to abandon my faith as a Christian and throw myself wholeheartedly into science, or I'm to abandon my interest in science or at least not take it seriously, and commit myself to a completely religious explanation of the world. But I can't have both. I can't have my cake and eat it. And maybe you're thinking a similar thing. You're open to a belief in God, but you're not sure where it would leave you academically. Would you be academically credible? Is it plausible to believe in a scientific and religious answer to questions at the same time? But if this claim were true, then surely wouldn't many of the top scientists not believe in God? According to the author Shirlev, between 1901 and 2000, the majority of Nobel Prize winners confessed a belief in God. The Human Genome Project is another good example of this. James Watson, who along with Francis Crick initiated the project, said he was embarrassed by any scientist who accepted truth by revelation. So that includes most beliefs in God. But his successor was Francis Collins, who was a Christian. If it was so certain that one day science will explain everything, then why would people who have a rather good grasp of science still believe in God? So that's what we're going to look at for the remainder of our time. Why can these scientists be academically credible and have integrity, but also believe in God? And then we need to ask, can we do the same? Can we remain academically credible and celebrate all the achievement that good and science has done and still rationally believe in God? I think the answer is yes, because as compelling as the idea that one day science will explain everything and killing the need for God sounds, I think there's a few problems. Because I think to believe this, you'd have to redefine science beyond its limits. See, science deals with what we can see, what we can touch and measure and observe. As a methodology, it deals with the physical and natural world. If we want to find some scientific truth, we make an observation and we perform experiments. That is the very nature of science. It deals with the physical. Questions of meaning and purpose are not physical things. They are questions that science doesn't even try to answer. So to say science is all we need to explain the world around us, redefine science way beyond its limits. And we either have to limit our knowledge or we have to abandon that idea. Let me give you an example. If you walked into my kitchen and found the kettle on, you might ask the question, why is the water boiling? And you'd be perfectly right to respond, well, the electrical energy provided by the mains is being converted into heat energy by the heating element, which in turn agitates water molecules, causing the temperature of the water to increase. And so the water is boiling. And hopefully if you were in a physics exam, that would be the type of answer you might give. Hopefully you'd get quite good marks. But another logical and true answer to the question is, well, I fancied a cup of tea, and so I'm boiling a kettle. That's a more personal answer to the question, one of will and desire. Science does a really great job of answering that question on one level, but when it comes to purpose, it could not explain why. And it goes further. Not only are the two answers equally valid, but they're also complementary. You see, only together do those two answers give us the full picture of what's going on. Some people might accept that science might not be able to answer every question we have, but say, okay, that's fine, but it can't be worth knowing. The philosopher Bertrand Russell puts it like this. I conclude that while it's true that science cannot decide questions of value, that is because they cannot be intellectually decided at all and lie outside the realm of truth and falsehood. Whatever knowledge is attainable must be attained by scientific methods, and what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. But I think there's two problems with this claim. The first problem with Russell's claim is that it's not a scientific statement. So if this statement is true, it also has to be false. And if the statement is false, then it's adding nothing to what we already know. It's a paradox. It's not a scientific statement. It's philosophy. Russell is claiming to have gained some knowledge, but he did not attain it by scientific methods. And so his claim by his own standards is not true and is something that mankind cannot know. But that's a bit of philosophical judo there. Secondly, it's elevating science far beyond what it wants to be. And rather than increasing the scope of our knowledge, it's actually squashing our knowledge. You see, it's crude to limit our knowledge just to science. An astronomer does not limit the size of their universe to the range of their telescope and say, anything outside the scope of my telescope can't be worth knowing about. But rather, they find different methods of attaining the knowledge. In the case of the astronomer, it might be that they find a bigger telescope, or that they start looking at X-rays or microwaves rather than in the visible light spectrum. There are questions off limit to science, but that does not mean we have to give up on finding the answer to these questions. We don't have to give up, but we do have to reevaluate what are the valid methods of attaining the desired knowledge. Some of the big questions science can't explain are questions of morality and questions of purpose. But it feels weak just to give up on questions of that matter, just because they can't be explained by science. We need to turn to other means of attaining answers to those questions. And that does not make the answers less valid. And what about the question of God? Where do we look to find answers of if God exists? What's he like? Does he care about us? Where are we to look to find answers to those questions? Well, the claim of Christianity is that at the very core of everything, the very core purpose of the world and our existence is a God who is love. Questions of purpose and meaning cannot be uncovered by science, but can only be revealed to us by the person with the purpose. If we think back to the analogy I used of boiling a kettle, the answer of the purpose behind the kettle's boiling can only be revealed by the one who put the kettle on, and they would need to make themselves known. Christians claim that God has made his purpose known, and that he has made himself known, but in a rather surprising way. The Bible does not claim that God has made himself known by writing a message in the sky or leaving a big book in a cave far away. But he's made himself known in a person, the person of Jesus. I want to read you the first line of a book in the Bible called Mark. It's one of the books that makes up the 66 books of the Bible, and it's one of the 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life found in the Bible. The book starts like this. The beginning of the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Mark seems to make 3 claims in the first line of his book. He claims that Jesus is the Messiah. In the Bible, Messiah means anointed one of God. In other words, God's chosen one, God's messenger. Mark is claiming that Jesus is revealing a message from God. And as we have been thinking, to find out a purpose, we need the one whose purpose it is to reveal it to us. If we want to know God's purpose, we need God to reveal it to us. And the claim of Mark is that he's revealed it to us in Jesus. And there's another claim. not only does Mark claim that God has sent a messenger, but he claims that God has sent his Son as a messenger. Mark claims that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus reveals to us what God is like. That in Jesus of Nazareth, God has invited us to scrutinize him. God has invited us to investigate him. And before all this, Mark claims that this is good news. Mark and Christians ever since have claimed that Jesus' coming and revealing God to us is good news. Good news for humanity and good news for us individually. The claim is that we can have a personal relationship with God, the maker of the universe. And it's what many people who have investigated Jesus has found to be true. And we call them Christians. But you don't have to just take my word for it. And it's a claim that myself and the CU would love for you to check out. Why don't you get your hands on a copy of Mark's Gospel, or just Google Mark Bible book, and it should come up as one of the first search results. And I reckon you can read it cover to cover in around 2 hours. And for the rest of this week, the CU are running events exploring some of the big questions of life and what Christianity has to say about them. They're designed to help you investigate this Jesus of Nazareth. So here's my invitation to you. Why don't you this week use your rational facets and investigation skills to see what you make of Jesus? And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what you find. Thanks for listening.